Good morning, and welcome to Prime Time. Prime Time brings you programming that celebrates learning in and beyond the classroom of Bethel faculty, students, and staff, and is a collaboration between the Friends of the BU Library, Academic Affairs, and other offices on campus. We're so glad you've joined us today. Today we are celebrating the 2022-2023 Faculty Excellence for Teaching Award winner, Dr. Julie DeHaan. Faculty Excellence Awards are awarded every year in areas of teaching, scholarship, and service. Faculty members nominate their colleagues, and the Professional Development Committee selects the winners. Candidates for the award exemplify excellence in integrating faith and engaging students in their classroom, teaching outside of the classroom by investing in their advisees, collaborative research, and with students in mentoring or tutoring their students, and collaborating with their colleagues across the university. Dr. Julie DeHaan has a diverse background in nursing. She began at Bethel in 2011. She is the current program director for the Cass Nursing Program Department. She teaches all things med-surg and has taught in the clinical, the lab, and the classroom settings. Last year, we had the pleasure of working together to create a new course called Pharmacology for Nurses, and she's going to share with you today some of the tactics utilized in that course for helping to keep students engaged with very heavy content. Dr. Julie DeHaan.
Thanks, Laura. I had no idea that she was going to introduce me today, so I had her picture up here just to say my partner in crime for this class that I'm going to talk about today was Laura. But I just want to acknowledge that this award was super humbling for me because I work in such a fabulous department with really, really fabulous teachers, and I've learned so much from them. So this is a product of all of them, not and just a little bit of me. It's mostly them. So anyway, Laura and I were asked to develop a pharmacology course, which of course is a lot of heavy content. But we are also facing some changes in nursing where they're changing how our nurses are tested on their licensure, for their licensure exam. And this next step in testing is called Next Generation or Next Gen because we abbreviate everything. And in Next Generation, it really focuses on the nurse's ability to think critically and apply that to an action, not just think about it, but what is the next action you would take. So this requires us to start teaching differently too, to get past just all that content memorization and delivery and understanding and extend it to how do we make sure they're able to actually put this into action and into use. So we had the opportunity to develop this class, which has a lot of content in it. Historically, students don't prepare really well for class, and maybe I'm not sure if they, in your classes, if they read a lot, but for us, we hear that they really don't read very much at all. And they have a hard time differentiating between what's important for them to understand in reading and what isn't that important. So we also wanted to be able to not only move from understanding of content, but move to that application or that higher order thinking during this course. And to round it all out, it's a 2-credit course. So it's not like we have a lot of time for them to work with, and we have to be cognizant of the fact that we can't add extra workload that would exceed a 2-credit course. So for Pharmacology for Nursing, we chose a text that wasn't a normal textbook with online resources. We use a product called ATI in nursing in order to help prepare our nurses to be ready for the NCLEX and ready for practice. NCLEX is our state board licensure, that's what we call the name of our test. So this resource was already embedded in ATI, so it really didn't have to purchase something new, which was students appreciated not having to purchase another textbook. It has embedded videos. I have a picture of it here. Embedded videos, you can play the audio out loud. It's got nice tabs on the side that they can go through and see the different areas if they want to go back and review something easier. Students were very complimentary of this resource, and it was a much nicer way for them to interact with the material. So as a pre-class assignment, in order to get them into the content, because again, it was really important they knew some of the content before they came to class because we want them to use it and to apply it when they are in class, we created Moodle module highlights, which are a Google Doc, and I'll come back to this slide in a minute, but this is what they look like. So for every module, Laura and I prepared these reading guides with fill in the blanks, where the students had to actually go into ATI and find this information and come to class with this completed. So we curated from the ATI resource, this is what's important, this is what you need to know. But it's a consistent format. Every week they had the same thing to do. We meet once a week for 2 hours. This really serves a dual purpose. They are then prepared for class, and it's a study guide for their exam. It's already there. They do not submit their module highlight. They submit the amount of time that they spent in the ATI module. This way we felt like we gave them, adult learners, we gave them control of that, but then also it helps with making sure that they're in the resource for as long as they should be, because ATI gives us an estimate of how long they should be in the resource to get through it all. And that's how we set those time limits up. Of course, we realize that students could turn it on and walk away, but then that's up to them. That's on them, because they still need to learn the content. While they are filling out the content, we have a link on our Moodle course called Muddy Points. And in the Muddy Points, if they come across something that they just don't understand or it's confusing, they can click on this another Google Doc, and they can put in what their question is. And we may answer the question immediately if we see it. We check on it probably about once a day just to see if there's something else in there. Or I could say to them, this is a great question, and we're going to talk about it in class. So sometimes we just integrate those right into class. We can also give them a link to some other resources to help them understand that better. You can see that Laura put some links into some other things to give them some other opportunities to interact with material. So when our students come to class, they are assigned to a cell group. The nursing department's been using cell groups for many years, and CEL stands for Collaboration Enhances Learning. And we put people in cell groups based on a lot of different things, but we want there to be a lot of variety within a group. So there'll be some academic variety. In nursing, we always hope for more gender variety, but that doesn't always happen. We want to also have some different variety of cultures. So we try and make these groups so they'll represent the teams that they'll be working with when they get out into nursing, and teamwork is really important in nursing. So these cell groups sit together. Laura and I had the wonderful opportunity of being in HC 1314, the room that you can draw on the walls. I'm trying to remember what that was. And they sit in pods in that room anyway. So they come in, they sit at their pod. The very first day, their cell group comes up with a name. And this is what I call that cell group. So when we do some of the activities, I'll say, okay, so what does, I'm trying to think of a name, Laura, what was the name of the group? Starfish. What do you guys think? And so then their group can answer as that. The students bring to class their completed module highlight, and we also produce slides for them. All of our presentations are on Google Slides, and we have a faculty version and a student version. The student version they download onto the computer. They take notes directly onto their version of the slides, which also helps decrease any need for printing or any other type of way for them to get that information. And I'll show you some examples of that as well. Our class rhythm is very the same. We always start with devotions. We always have a pun, too. You're going to get that at the end today, so hold on for that. We always talk about the muddy point, and then we choose to discuss things in class that we know are difficult for students. We know that these concepts are the hardest ones for students to grasp, or things that are the most important content or key concepts within that lecture, within that time period, within that module. And then we chunk those. We don't deliver a lecture for a solid hour and then do activities for the next hour. We chunk those concepts, and then they're interspersed with different activities. So, for example, they can be interspersed with links to pathophysiology or to health assessment, which are two courses that our nurses students take at the same time. we want them to realize that what they're learning in patho in the biology department is specifically related to what they're learning in pharmacology, and what they're learning in health assessment in the nursing department also is related to all three of those things. So we stay in contact with the biology professor and say, what order are you teaching this in? And we arrange our content to follow each other's order so that when they're talking about the heart in pathophysiology, we're talking about heart meds in pharmacology to help link those things for our students better. We also have small group discussions, and I'll show you a few examples of those. We also write NCLEX questions, those higher level learning questions that we intersperse throughout because they are harder to do. There's always this huge learning curve when students start to get NCLEX type questions because they are higher order thinking questions. So we practice them together in the classroom before they see them on the exam. And at the end of the class, we do an application activity, which is more, takes maybe anywhere from half an hour to 40 minutes at the end of the class that has them put into practice, apply what they're learning that day, and we'll give you some examples of those as well. So this is one of our slides that links to assessment and pathophysiology. This is from our anemia lecture, or our medications that address all things heme. They have to list the patient manifestations, and this links back to patho. This is an example of the slide that they have, so then they would need to fill in the lines as we start to talk about them. I would ask them first what they would be, what they feel the answer is, and we'll go from there. And then why these symptoms occur, that rationale is important, right? We're not just going to say these are the symptoms. We want to know why they occur, and when you know both those things, then the treatment makes much more sense. This is another pathophysiology connection. Towards the middle of the semester, we started to put these symbols on our slides just to let them know, here's where patho links to what we're talking about, just to make sure it's a cohesive, this is your nursing education, even though these are separate courses. So that's just a patho connection there. This one is about thrombolytics and the risk for bleeding. We're talking, this is more about the content that we would be worried about or concerned about as teaching pharm. Or what are those adverse effects of medications, and as nurses, what are we watching for, what are we looking for? So this is what we would be talking about in class. And then throughout all of our time in class, we intersperse these practice questions, and these are the higher order thinking questions. I'm just going to flip through these. I don't expect you to answer them right now, but this is an example of an applying question about aspirin. And what we do with these is the cell group, they each get a packet of A, B, C, D, E, F, because sometimes we have select all that apply questions that actually have 6 or 7 answers to them. And we put the question on the board, and then that cell group discusses what the answer is, and they have to choose the card that they are really high tech, choose the card that I think this is the answer, and then they start to hold up, I think it's A, I think it's B. And then we talk about why they chose that answer in order to make sure we flush out their thinking, because we want to see what they're thinking to correct any misconceptions and at the same time to point them in the right direction. Just a couple more examples of that. We love select all that apply questions. This is actually a knowledge question, but we use select all that apply quite a bit. Knowledge level is your lowest level of Bloom's taxonomy. But a lot of confusion for this one, this knowledge question, so we have them do select all that apply. So besides the NCLEX questions, we also have them do a small cell group activities. Some of these don't take very long at all, and some of them take maybe up to 5 minutes. But they also help them work together as a group to think through content as a group in order to apply what they're learning. So some examples of, this was for our anemia class too. We wanted them to think about the nutritional recommendations for patients who have anemia, and how easy or difficult would it be for patients to comply with these recommendations and why. And write your thoughts on the wall nearest you. And then cell groups introduce, or they present their wall, their section of the wall, to the rest of the class, and we learn from each other what they take away. What I really appreciated about this cell group discussion is it brought up things like food inequity, food deserts. It brought up people who are vegans or have different choices. So it was a really rich discussion that really matters when you think about how to educate patients on these things when they live in all these different areas with all these other barriers besides just the knowledge to know what they should be eating to help with their anemia. We have them bring that ATI highlights document, and as a cell group, they need to identify the top 3 things of all of these on the wall, and we make sure this helps us see, do they realize and recognize what those priorities are, right? When you look at the adverse effects of a medication, you see a list that's, this long, but we want them to say, these are the ones that are most important. These are the ones that are going to cause the most harm to my patient, or these are the ones that the patients need to learn about. So we want them to prioritize those, and then again, they present them and talk through them. We focus on education. A lot of nurses do education all the time with patients, so how do you teach this in a manner that is understandable for a patient who doesn't speak medicalese? And then write that on the wall next to you as well. We also try to look at important things in society and bring them into the classroom so it's applicable to what's happening right now. And this was one activity that we did about opioids and the opioid addiction issue that's in our society, and talking about what kind of patient education is really important as you consider how to teach your patients about how the use of opioids and when it's appropriate and how they should be used. Just another short one about teaching, patient education. And then at the end of the class, we also do these bigger activities that are really focused on, okay, how are we going to take what we've learned today and put it into action? And we have a huge variety of things, so I just chose a few of them to share with you to see that there's some of them that you'll be really familiar with and some of them that you perhaps would like to check out. So for this one, we had videos. This was with our opioid lecture that day, pain medications lecture that day. We had them listen to or watch real-life stories, videos of people who have lost loved ones to opioid use disorder or an overdose, and then discuss these things on the wall here, and then we held a bigger discussion afterwards. Another one is we had the cell group create a skit specifically about why the patient needs to take this medication, how it works, instructions for taking it, potential adverse effects, what to report to their provider, and then all the nursing considerations when taking this, nutritional considerations when taking this medicine. And then we assigned each cell group a certain med. They produce a skit, we tape them, and we put them on Moodle, and they can use those for studying then because it contains all of the information that's most pertinent for that medication in a fun, entertaining way for them to gather it. Some really creative ones happened with this. It was really fun. During respiratory week, I took boxes of cold medication, over-the-counter cold medications with all different combinations of cold medications, and I put a box, empty box, no meds in it, empty box on each table, and then had them read that label, figure out exactly what that cold medication would be treating, what it'd be good for, and then also had them play if they were the nurse hotline. So you are the nurse hotline, you get a call from your patient that says, I'm running a fever, I'm taking acetaminophen along with this medication, is that okay? So they need to look at their box on the table and decide, is that okay to take with this cold medication or is it not okay? And then answer some other questions. I'm feeling really achy still, can I take something else with this med? Or I'm coughing up so much phlegm, can I take something else with this med? And then be able to answer those questions, and they go through, and as each table, each cell group answers, they give the rationale for yes, we can take it, or no, we can't because it's also in this medication. We also did a respiratory escape room this day where there were 4 different scenarios, and in order to get the clue to the next one, they had to say which medication would be most useful and which patient teaching education would be pertinent with that medication. And then once they came to me and I could read it, because can't let anybody else hear what's going on, then they would get the next clue, and they competed in order to get all the way out of the escape room. So really, again, low tech, but it worked well. Laura did a fun assignment with them. You guys have all seen the commercials on television for all the different medications, right? So she had them make an infomercial about a specific antibiotic, antifungal, parasitic, or antiviral medication, and they created their commercial, and then we also filmed those and put them online for them to study with as well. Of course, there's Kahoot. We've played Team Kahoot. So the cell group table submits an answer together. This slows the game down, which is nice, and encourages a discussion then, so they hear each other's thinking. So you play Kahoot in team mode. Laura played Pharmacology Family Feud and had the top 4 answers on the board, and they had to compete against each other to get the top 4 answers. As another example. We also had them role play. We talked about we talked about HIV drugs. Watched a TED Talk about eradicating HIV and the problems with that. So half the group was preparing questions as a patient, and the other half was preparing education for the patient, and then they role played it out, and the patients asked the nurses questions and had to answer each other's questions that way. That went well as too. And then we talked about themes from their group after they were finished doing this. Jeopardy is another game that we've played with them. That again gets at all those content details, and some of it is application as well. We also had them create a poster where they drew on the wall, and the poster was divided into 4 different areas. And then they had to present their poster to the rest of the class. And we took pictures of the posters and put those on Moodle as well. We really encouraged them not to put words on here as much as to draw, because if they draw a picture, that's going to be a better memory tool than if they put on words. And again, some of the things they come up with was really interesting and really fun. And I had one student even write in their eval, I love that, because when I'm taking the test, what I remembered was the picture. What I remembered is what they drew, and it wasn't even what our team drew, it was what somebody else drew. So that was good as well. We also played Pictionary, speaking of drawing. So for Pictionary, they had a medication that they had, and they had to tell how that medication worked. And of course, the other teams are guessing as they're seeing how they're drawing how the medication works, and then the adverse side effects, again with pictures and drawing, and this was a fun one, and again I got a lot of good learning, a lot of interesting drawings that they won't forget because they were engaged in the activity. Interspersed throughout our course, we had them write reflections, because again we want to connect pharmacology and nursing to real ethical and real situations that are in society today. So we gave them some time in class to finish these, but they were due at midnight of the day of class. They weren't long papers, but were things that would just encourage them to take some topics and think a little more deeply about them. So one of them was about the opioid crisis. What role does a nurse play in addressing the opioid crisis? And we wanted them to choose 2 ethical principles, and we listed them for you there, and then finally to talk about their Christian faith and how that intersects with your response as a nurse. Another example was Laura showed them a video of antibiotic stewardship, and then what are the ethical principles that apply here, and then how has societal culture influenced the use of antibiotics? What 3 actions can you take as a nurse when you go out into practice to promote good antibiotic stewardship? And then ask the question about, should nurses wear body cameras and be legally responsible if not adhering to infection standards? Why or why not? I think that's got some interesting responses too. So that's kind of the picture of the course as a whole and how we ran it throughout the semester. At the end of year 1, because we've only done this for 1 year now, we felt like there was really good participation in class. comments in class would be like, I can't believe 2 hours is over, because it went so quickly that they were really engaged. Our exams, we chose and wrote questions that were higher order thinking questions. We really felt like we helped develop some of those questions as they went on. But we also want to admit that the first year was a ton of work, and we are really looking forward to teaching it a second year and not having to develop all of those reading module guides. I think that was probably one of the most time-consuming things, along with writing hundreds of questions for the first time. Also was very time-consuming. Interestingly enough, yesterday I teach in a med-surg course with juniors. This is taught to spring sophomores. And one of the juniors walked up to me and said, is there any chance that you could have those reading guides for med-surg? Because I really think they're, and I was thinking, I'll talk to Dr. Sandow about that. Because again, I think it's a really good way for us to curate what's important, but the workload to get to that point is pretty intense. Students' evaluations, I know these are really small, and I just chose a few of them. They really had positive responses to this class. We had really good ID evaluations. They liked all the different ways we had them engage with the material. They liked all the different learning styles we used. They liked the fact that it was the same rhythm every week, but yet it was a good variety of things within the class. There were some students, I just want to point this out because they asked for quizzes. Have you had students ask for quizzes before? And it was more than once that somebody asked for a quiz that they would like. I think we should be quizzed on this so we know it a little better when we come to class, which I thought was really interesting. There are some students who had some feedback for us. They want the games not to go super fast without an explanation. So as we go forward, we'll be thinking about how we can slow down those games again, like a Team Kahoot idea where they have to talk and discuss in order to really engage that thinking and that evaluation of thinking before they give an answer. Here's more in-class quizzes on this one too. And then some people just don't like games, but that was only one patient. I do that all the time. One student comment, not a lot of them. So that's what we did, and we really feel like we were successful in getting students to think at a higher level. We were successful at taking a ton of content and working to application during class. And I'd be happy to answer any questions if you have any. Thank you. Connie.
That was awesome. I just can't believe how you incorporated all those things. I saw one place where it said hot question. What did that mean?
Higher order thinking.
Oh.
It's just an abbreviation for higher order thinking.
Well, I did observe one of the respiratory class, so I'm a witness to, students were so engaged. I remember asking Julie afterwards, okay, how come they were so engaged? Like, how did they know this? How were they so prepared for class? And then she shared with me the sheet that you created. They were all so prepared for class. I have never seen anything like it, ever. Seen students so prepared. Because they had to be to do the
They had to be.
They had to be, but they were. So that was super interesting to me. Plus, it was just a lot of, it was fun. It was fun in the class. It was enjoyable. So, but that was something that really stuck out to me is how prepared they were for class. And how varied it was, so many different things.
We think about the research out there with Gen Z students, and their attention span at max is about 7 minutes.
Yeah.
So you need to switch things up on a regular basis in order to continue to engage them. So, yeah.
My question relates to what do they do, how they use this information going forward. And I teach juniors in clinical and in the lab, and I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts about any activities or measurements later, or just learning activities or anything that students could be engaged with in their junior year that would either really reinforce their learning or measure it. And our students have always had, learned pharmacology. So it's not like this is brand new, but
Right.
the depth I think that you took them to in this class is probably different than it maybe has been before. And it just strikes me, I don't know that I'm necessarily teaching clinical differently related to meds than I have before. And yet, listening to you, I realize, wow, these students should be way more capable, perhaps. And so, are there things we could do in the junior year to really build on that differently? I don't, if you have any thoughts about that. And Laura, I mean, too, I don't know.
Anecdotally, Kirsten and I have noticed in Dr. Sandow, Kristen teaches med-surg course with me, which is the next series of courses for students in the nursing program. And here is where we incorporate a lot of medications into our med-surg course. It appears to both of us, I may be a little biased because I taught them and I know what they should know, but even Kristen has said, yeah, they seem to know their meds better. On our first exam, the pharmacology questions that were more focused on pharmacology, they didn't do as poorly as the others did. So that measurement, I think, is there. It'll be interesting to take a look at a whole semester once we have that information. But I think that as they go forward, this whole idea of making sure that they're connecting the whole picture, right? So you know this about meds, but now you see your patient in clinical. What do you see is most important to teach this patient? What do you see is the most important adverse effect that's affecting your patient, and how we can address that, and what education do they need? Which is, I think, things that you guys do already. So I don't know if you kind of put me on the spot, Ann. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean,
It's a really good question.
I feel challenged. I feel challenged as a clinical teacher. I mean, hearing all the ways that you had the students apply it, and I realized just even in my expectations for students about teaching patients about medications, perhaps my expectations could be a little bit higher in the first semester. Now, granted, they're new in the hospital, they're new with patients, and there's just that learning curve. And yet, they've done a lot of activities to teach and consider education. And that's, often a really basic kind of teaching that we really do push our students in their first year of clinical. You can do this, right? We can teach them about this med or that, and maybe we could ramp that up a bit, and I could expect a little bit more of them earlier in the fall.
Yep, I would think you would be able to. Don't you think, Laura?
So,
Yeah, because we did a lot of emphasis on patient education.
Yeah.
the other piece would be that in Pharm, we had them create med cards that they can then utilize in clinical.
Right.
And so the idea that they have those readily available to them, and instead of saying, my patient's on, these medications, and I don't know what they do, they can oftentimes refer back to those pre-made med cards that we, decided which ones are most common. So just that, having that prepared for them just made it more prepared for clinical. So.
I think we've done quite a bit of ramping up on Pharm, because our predictor exams for NCLEX show that our students didn't perform the best in Pharm. So that was one area that we really, really did some additional work on. And it'll be interesting now with the students in the sophomore class where they are on that predictor Pharm test for NCLEX, because, that's not unusual for students to not do well in Pharm, period, on that NCLEX exam. But we're hoping, and we also know that there's such a huge medication error crisis for nursing, and that this is something that's really
It's a patient safety issue.
Patient safety issue is really big right now.
Kristen.
First of all, thank you so much, because this wasn't hundreds of hours, this was probably over 1,000 hours, Thank you for this amazing creation. And to answer Ann's question, what do we see, or do we doing anything differently in junior clinical? Week 2, I helped a student print off furosemide education, sent her in by herself to teach the patient. And then afterwards I said, as a small group, when did you feel like an actual nurse today? And she said, when I was in there teaching about furosemide. So I think I'm probably pushing them a little sooner, because I know that they've had more practice with, with the meds and application.
And that might be a great opportunity to maybe have students choose one of the meds that they are either giving or that they are supposed to know that week for that patient, and have them print off the care notes and say, okay, teach. Make sure you teach your patient about this medication today.
The other thing I noticed in teaching medical surgical the subsequent semester is that they're more readily jumping into, a lot of my study guides have role-playing teaching, and now they get why that's important. Before, I think a lot of them didn't actually do it, and now they're just more ready to use that as a study guide, to role-play with each other, the teaching.
Yeah. That role play really does help. I forgot to repeat questions for people on Zoom. I'm sorry, Anne.
I think we can pick it.
Okay.
Julie, I love so much about this presentation. I particularly appreciate the connections you're making to the other classes, because I think that's really important to get the whole picture of what students are doing. I was trying to think through, because as I was listening to you, I thought, oh my gosh, this is so much work to make this happen. And I was trying to think through ways, maybe there are ways students could do some of that work over time, like, so a ton of work up front to put the class together, but if you already have a class going, like I'm thinking teaching literature, would there be a way for me to have students create questions that we could work with, and then in the future, I could keep some of those questions to put them together?
Absolutely.
You know,
Absolutely.
like that kind of thing?
Yeah. For some of the activities, the students ended up revising them for us as it went along, which I think was okay too. But as I go forward teaching med-surg now too, I have not tried to think I'm going to revamp this whole course that way. I'm just choosing one thing every module. Like, okay, I can redo one thing to make it a small incremental step, but not do the whole thing at once. But yeah, I think students they can start thinking or bringing to class, how does this relate to society right now? And you go look and bring that in, and then what questions can be generated from them to make those reflective type things happen.
I would just add, Christy, that is a great consideration, you know. For what we do at the beginning of junior year is we pull aside the curtain and we let them see, these are the types of equus questions, this is Bloom's taxonomy, and so that they know, like, these are the kind of questions and the categories, so they know what to expect, and then also that would help them to write better questions right off the bat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we have students write quiz questions, and they realize just how hard that is to write a really good question, right? So what we have them write them in groups sometimes. We don't do this in Pharm, but we could do this in Pharm. Actually, you did it in when you taught antibiotics, right? You had them write questions. So what were the common misconceptions that your group had about this? And that's your distractor, right? That's your wrong answer. So that activity was really, really good for them too, to be able to pull together what was our errant thinking. And if this was what we thought was wrong, then I bet somebody else might think this was wrong too. Yes.
I just wondered, I'm so impressed by the sheer variety and the level of creativity that you guys exhibit in this class, and I wonder, where did you get your ideas? Were they primarily your own together, or had you seen some of this in play somewhere else, or it's just really impressive.
Just look around behind you. There's so much creativity in our department. So some of these ideas were original to Laura and I, but the majority of them were things that we've thought of together as a department. And you know, when you work as a team, somebody mentions something and somebody has a little different takes to it, so it ends up being a way better product because you've had multiple minds feeding into it. So it was definitely just, like I mentioned at the very beginning, this is because I work in a department that is full of creative people. And there's a lot online, right? There's a ton of things online.
And how about the NLN conference, the teaching conference? Did they ever talk about any strategies such as this, or not really?
Yes, they did talk about different ways. Escape rooms are a big thing that's out there right now in the NLN community. They also talk about the importance of chunking things and teaching things in chunks and having activities immediately afterward. You want to add anything else?
Julie came and said, should we teach this together? And kind of proposed that it was going to be hundreds of hours of work. And I said, do we get to play Pharmacology too?
Yeah.
Then she convinced me that, yeah, the hundreds of hours of work would be okay.
Laura's been trying to play Pharmacology feud for like
Forever.
years.
Someone
Years.
finally gave me an opportunity.
And what's interesting with that game is that Laura made pharmacology, cardiology is a 2 weeks worth of class because there's so many medications that apply to our cardiovascular patients. So she made the pharmacology food for the first week, but the second week the students had to contribute the questions to pharmacology food, and that's the questions and the answers.
I made the answers, they made the question, or they answered what were the priority things.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and that way they were involved in the creation of the game as well.
So when you do it next time, will you do the same thing and have the students create, or do you think you'll just present it as a feud game?
I don't know. There was some, because I had to then sometimes correct. So
Right.
if students chose what they felt were the top 4 priority things, but they left one out,
Yeah.
that then students were trying to answer, and I'm like, that's a correct answer, and I agree that that's a priority thing. So there was a little bit of tension over
Because they didn't get points.
because they get points, yeah. No, not points, but they get points in class, yes. So there was a little bit of tension over like, but then I would clearly define for them that I would also list this as a priority thing. So if you're taking your own notes, yes, add this to your, list to try to help correct any, student brought forward, like kind of errors in prioritization. So I'm not sure. We're just getting through the fall.
How were students graded in this course? Is it mainly on tests or do
Yeah.
they have projects to turn in?
They had, how much of our, was it 40% was exams? I think 40% was exams. We had 3 exams during the semester, 2 during and a final. The reflection papers were part of that, those 4 reflection papers. We also graded on their submission of that time that they had to submit. And if they submitted it on time and they met the time requirement, they got points with that. They also had participation points. So if they weren't in class, they didn't get those points. If they didn't come prepared to class, they didn't get those points either. So was there anything else that I'm forgetting?
Med cards.
Oh, med cards. We also had them, we chose medication cards that we know they're going to use going forward in nursing school. So we chose them for every module, you had to make anywhere from 7 to 8 med cards, and then those were submitted for grading as well.
But in the format that they would need for the next semester.
So it's in the same format that they're going to use going forward junior and senior year. So they ended up, yeah, they didn't now, but they have come back to me and say, we really like the med cards now because they're made and done. They ended up having somewhere between 90 to 100 med cards finished by the end of the course.
I bet they hated that. Like in the process.
In the process, they did. We kept telling them, you're going to like this later. And they're like, uh-huh. But yeah.
And it gave them one more opportunity to see one more resource. We have them, one more online resource. It's an online
App.
Yeah, app for like a Davis drug guide. And so they had to use that and see where the content overlapped, that where this drug guide was also confirming what the ATI was saying as the adverse effects. And so kind of giving them one more resource or tool and then kind of combining it to see, and then hopefully having just the repetitive nature of they had to type out one more time what those adverse side effects were. Yeah, we were hoping that would help them to know.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you all for coming. It's much nicer to talk to people in empty space, so I appreciate your attendance. If you have any questions, please let us know.